Welcome, teens and tweens, to the December craft for winter-themed Shrinky Dink fairy lights. You'll need the craft kit from the library, as well as a few additional supplies. Along with coloring utensils, such as permanent markers and color pencils, you'll need to gather some scissors, a baking sheet, and oven mitts from home. You'll also need access to an oven or microwave oven large enough to fit your baking tray. Once you've gathered your additional supplies, you should find the following in your craft kits: a sheet with mitten patterns on it, a black permanent marker, and 1 to 2 sheets of Shrinky Dink paper. Go ahead and choose the mitten pattern you want to use and outline 2 copies of each hand as close together on your Shrinky Dink sheet, just like I'm doing here. Make sure you're tracing or drawing on the rougher side of the Shrinky Dink, not the smooth side. By tracing or drawing your mittens as close together like this, you'll end up with extra space along the edges of your sheet to add some smaller shapes. Here's how I trace some smaller shapes straight from my tablet onto the Shrinky Dink sheet. I did have to adjust the snowflakes a little bit here and there, and then for this sheet, you can see that I also had to adjust some of the beanies to be slightly smaller than the image that I was using. So if you do use this method, just use the image as a guide. Embrace the fun of the shapes not all being identical. And if you don't have a tablet to use, you can also print out additional shapes using your library card, or if you have a printer at home, or you can just draw freehand as well. Next, you'll want to color in your shapes. If you use permanent markers like I'm doing here, your final product will reflect more rich and saturated colors than if you use the color pencils, so keep that in mind. Here's a still shot of a completed sheet of shapes where I used a mix of permanent markers and color pencils just so you can see the full layout. Once you have a completed sheet like this, you'll want to begin cutting out the shapes. As you cut out your shapes, make sure to cut along the outside of your black outline for each shape. As you're doing this, you'll notice for the shapes that have finer details, like the small snowflakes for instance, that you're not going to be able to cut directly around the black outline. That's okay. Once all your shapes are cut out, you should have a stack that resembles something like this. Next, you'll want to preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. While your oven is preheating to 325, lay out the provided parchment paper sheet on your baking tray and arrange your shapes colored side up with some space in between each shape on top of the parchment paper. You'll notice with the snowflake patterns here that I cut more roughly around them, so if you use some snowflakes as well, I would suggest doing the same thing to ensure you're not fighting the tiny shape as you cut it out. Once the oven has reached 325, carefully put your cookie sheet in and bake your shapes for 1 to 3 minutes or until each shape has shrunk to about 1/3 of its original size and has laid flat on the parchment paper for 30 seconds. Make sure to set a timer. On average, I did mine for about 2.5 minutes. At the end of 2 to 3 minutes, you should end up with something like this. Make sure to use oven mitts when you take your baking tray out of the oven. Set it out to cool and turn your oven off. While the shapes are cooling, gather your strand of fairy lights and adhesive dots from the craft kit, plus your scissors and something to hold down the fairy lights when you unwind them. Once your shapes are cool to the touch, gather them and figure out how you want to arrange them on your strand of lights. If you're anything like me, you'll want to establish a pattern with your shapes here. Once you've figured out your pattern, grab your scissors and adhesive dots. You'll want to trim sections of the adhesive dots to match both the size of your shape and the width of the light strand. Once you've attached all of your shapes to your strand of fairy lights, you should have something like this. Once you have that done, pull the tab on the battery box and turn your lights on. Hang them up and enjoy your festive lights this winter, or give them as a gift to a friend. Thanks for watching. Let us know how you enjoyed this craft and share your creations with us on social media by using the hashtag SCVLibraryTeens when you post.